Hey everyone, how's everyone doing on this Friday, July 11th? We'll be starting in a few minutes. All right, just a few minutes. Let me send out some stuff. All right. Yeah, we'll have a couple of minutes left. I wonder if I can actually. Yeah, we'll be starting in 4 or 5 minutes. Everyone can hear me? Okay. You can, if you want to ask questions, which I definitely appreciate, you can ask questions in the YouTube chat. All right. If you want to introduce yourself, where you're joining in from, which country, which state, wherever, and how did you and where did you hear about this live stream, that always helps. So you can definitely type it out. You can write it on the YouTube chat. I am looking at YouTube chat, so I'll be answering your questions over there. So that is perfectly fine. Everything looks good over here on my end. Okay. All right, Tommy D'Angelo. Yes, I can. Okay, hello. Well, hello, Tommy. Just gonna wait for a couple of more minutes, everyone. Then we're gonna start. It's supposed to start at 11 Central, so we got 2, 3 minutes left. Again, if you're joining in, you want to introduce yourself, you can introduce yourself on the YouTube chat. I am monitoring the chat, so I will be able to answer your questions. Just to let you know, I have presented this live stream before. I think it was maybe a month ago or so. So it will be the same kind of like the same live stream, same content. And probably in next couple of weeks, I will do more of a coding exercise live so that you can see that how everything kind of joins in together. All right. So I'll do that. Probably not next week, but week after next, I'll probably do that. All right. Wow, it's really hot. I'm in Houston, Texas, and it is just unforgivingly hot. It's insanely hot. Plus, I'm drinking coffee, so that makes it even harder. Lots of people joining in. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Once again, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead and introduce yourself in the YouTube chat and where you are logging in from. How did you hear about this live stream? Hello from Serbia. Heard about the live stream through subscribing to channel. That's great, Serbia. Wow. Please upload more videos on YouTube. I thought I was uploading a lot of videos. Yeah, let me know what kind of videos you want to be. I just uploaded Finance Kit Part 1. And I think next Tuesday, in a couple of days, you will see Finance Kit Part 2. And yeah, after that, I am researching on what videos to create. So we'll see, you know. I'll probably do another live stream on, obviously on SwiftUI architecture. I'll probably do another one on navigation patterns in SwiftUI. That will be interesting. And then I'll do a foundation models. So these are upcoming, at least three live stream that is coming up in the future. All right. All right. Okay, everyone. So I think we can probably get started. All right. Just to let you know, and I think I've already told you about this, that I have presented this live stream before, probably like a month ago. Uh, some great questions in that live stream also. So if you do have any questions, feel free to, write it in the YouTube chat. So whatever I'm going to discuss in this live stream, these are just my views of, SwiftUI architecture. And what I want you to do is to just try it out. Maybe you have a dummy app, your pet project, your passion project that you're working on. Just try it out, and then you can compare it, like how you like it or not. Maybe it will work for you, maybe it will not work for you. But the best thing is that you should try it out. All right. I see a lot of people are joining in. If you are joining in, go ahead and introduce yourself on the YouTube chat. We'll start in probably in one more minute, and then I'll get started. All right. Thank you for joining in, everyone. That's great. I want to. What is this? All right. Studio. Just looking at different things over here. The control system. Everything is working okay. All right. All right, everyone. And by the way, if you do have any questions, just let me know. I'm not going to go full screen from the start because I want to see your questions also. So I'm just going to, hopefully everyone can see the, the page and everything. All right. So sometime I'll go full screen and sometime I'll not go full screen because I want to see your questions too. So if I go full screen, I can't really see your questions. Okay. So this talk is about SwiftUI architecture. There will be some code examples that I have, which will be on the slides. And as I mentioned earlier on, that maybe in the next live stream, I will actually dive into more code and show you how you can create applications with networking and all that stuff. All right. So here's a little bit about myself. My name is Mohammad Azam. I'm an iOS developer. I'm also a coding bootcamp instructor. So I work for a company called Digital Crafts, where I teach web development, and I also teach AI and machine learning using Python. All right, so very different things. So right now I'm teaching mostly AI and machine learning with scikit-learn and all that cool stuff. Apart from that, I am a founder of Azam Sharp School, which maybe you have visited. It's azamsharp.school. This is where I host my workshops. I have my courses over there. I also do a one-on-one sessions. Let me see. Yeah, so this is Azam Sharp School. You can visit it at Azam Sharp School and check it out. Author, speaker, I do speak at conferences. And, sometime different cities, they will just call me. I go over there, present a different topic. If they provide accommodation and airfare, I just go there for free. All right. So it's always fun. So I've done that in Mexico City. I've done that in in Portland, not Portland, sorry. What's the other one? Boston and all that. So it's always fun. All right. So buckle up because whenever we talk about architecture, that's always like a sensitive topic. So just buckle up and just try to see if it works for you or not. I mean, this might be some new concepts over there. This might be that, oh, I'm actually using, uh, one-on-one session. Sorry, I'm just going to jump over here. You can just check it out over there. All right. Just go to azamsharp.school if you want one-on-one session stuff, and you can just check out the link. All right. Okay. So 2019. All right. Apple released SwiftUI. And I was actually very happy because I was already working with React because I was teaching, web development, and I was already looking into Flutter. I actually kind of enjoyed Flutter also. Um, so SwiftUI felt like pretty good. I mean, it's like, oh, it's very close to React and very close to Flutter. So then I started thinking about that, okay, what pattern should I be using? All right. Now, by the way, I can actually see what you are seeing, the live, and it is a couple of seconds behind. So, but anyways, if you do have any questions any time, you can ask, and you know, it's it's running like at least like 4 or 5 seconds behind. All right. But anyways, so at that time when I was learning Swift UI, uh, coming from obviously UI kit background where you automatically just select MVC pattern, I started thinking that, okay, what should I use? And everyone was using MVVM. So I'm like, okay, I mean, this is a great pattern. I mean, it's been around for a very long time, uh, known as presentation pattern, presentation model, and then MVVM and WPF. So I'm like, okay, I can start using that. And from there on, I started writing like a lot of different articles on that. I wrote a book on it. I presented it in different conferences, on the different uh, podcasts. I wrote some really popular articles and a lot of videos on Medium. I published some articles, created some courses on it, and a lot of content basically. I wrote a lot of content and presented at different conferences. Now, most of my apps were client server applications or core data and Swift data application. I think that's kind of common if you are working in iOS. These are the kind of application you're going to write anyways, right? It's mostly going to be client server. Not sure why it's on 2 lines. There we go. Mostly they're going to be client server, or they're going to be like combination of client server and Swift data, core data. So all of them can be kind of like combined together. All right. So these were most of my applications. Um, and let's say that I was building an app with 5 different screens. Obviously, your app will have like more or less screens. Hello, Sonia from California. So these were the apps that I was building, right? I mean, this is just an example, obviously, with 5 different screens. This can be like 50 different screens. The concept of screen over here is a little bit different from views, by the way. All right, the screen, whenever I say screen, you can see screen. I know it's kind of like hard to point out over here because the color is also orange. Screen. So screen is basically a view, but it's more of a container view, and it's not really created for reusability. It's just so that we can uh, reflect one particular page of the application. All right. So I had a couple of different screens. And obviously, if you're following the classical model, the classical MVVM pattern, because MVVM is just, whenever people talk about MVVM, they're always talking about something different. Like if you ask 10 different people and they will show you their MVVM code, they say, oh, we have written, our application is actually using MVVM pattern. All of them will be different. All right, that's what I've actually encountered. I've gone to a lot of conferences. I talked to a lot of people from many different big companies, and they're like, "Hey, Adam, can you look at my code? And I'm using this pattern. I'm using is am I using it correctly? Am I using making things hard for me?" When I look at it, I mean, they might be saying that, "Oh, we are using MVVM," but they're not using MVVM. They're using it completely differently. Okay, so for that, I'm going to just go with kind of like a classical definition of MVVM, which if you go back to, early 2000s, um, I think presentation model was the first name for this pattern, and then Microsoft came with WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. Anybody over here work with Windows Presentation Foundation in Microsoft? Yeah, let me know if you work on that. It's a cool framework. I mean, it's still being used apparently, but it's for creating Windows application. And that's where the name MVVM kind of came. It's just a marketing name, by the way, all right, because the actual name was presentation model. Martin Fowler wrote an article about it in 2004, I believe. So the main concept of MVVM over there, which is the one that I'm discussing because I don't want to target all the 30 different implementation people are using in iOS community, is if you have one screen, you will have one-to-one relationship with a view model. So over here in this diagram, you can also see I have a movie list screen, and then I have a movie list view model. I have a add movie screen, add movie view model, movie detail screen, movie detail view model. All right. So if you go with the classical MVVM approach, because now there are so many approaches, this is kind of like what was done. And when I worked on a very large project for oil and gas companies in Houston, that is also the one that we used. We had every single screen would have one-to-one relationship with a view model. All right. So that's what I did because that's what I've learned, and that's kind of like the actual classical definition of MVVM, that every single screen will have a separate view model around it. So 3 screens, 3 view models. Now the view models will or can have a dependency on HTTP client. So you can see over here, I'm taking HTTP client, and all these view models are actually using HTTP client to call the server, get the data and whatnot. So if you look at it from the screen to view model, now again, it's a screen, it's not a view. I mean, it is obviously a SwiftUI view, but the screens are not meant for reusability. They are just kind of like the parent container. All right. So you're not going to be like, oh, I want to use this screen again or somewhere. Let me actually fix the spelling over there. So if you have 5 different screens, you will end up with 5 different view models. All right. Now, some of you who might be doing MVVM, you might say, hold on a second, I don't do it this way. You can say that, right? But then it means that you are using a variation. Then it means that you're not using MVVM. You're just calling it MVVM because you don't know what MVVM is in a classical sense. So that's why I'm just going with the classical MVVM over here, where every single screen will have every single view model. All right. All right. Now each screen then have a dependency on a view model, one-to-one relationship, and a view model will have a dependency on HTTP client. So you may end up with code something like this, where you are creating a screen and then you have to pass in the view model, and then in order to pass the view model, you have to pass in HTTP client and so on. These dependencies can be done in many different ways, and the actual screen might look like this, right? Obviously, if it's like since it is a one-to-one dependency, you don't really need to pass in the view model, but then I think the main reason we're passing it over here is because of HTTP client. We're injecting the HTTP client, and we want to inject a fake or a mocked HTTP client also. So that's why we're passing it like this. All right. What is this? Okay, the same thing. The other thing that I started noticing is that when SwiftUI came out in 2019, they had all of these different, macros and property wrappers, all of these cool things, app storage, environment object, focus state, fetch request for core data, environment query for Swift data. But SwiftUI was designed in such a way that all of these things were just accessible, available inside the view. I mean, if we create a view model, which in this case is an observable object, we won't be able to access any of these things easily. And I said easily because you can access environment object and all these things. If you kind of twist and turn the architecture, you will be able to access these things. But we were not able to access them easily. And most of the applications have a very complicated view hierarchy. So it's not like everything is very flat and you start with a parent and you only have one child and then it becomes the leaf node. You can have a parent that can have a child, that can have a grandchild and great grandchild and so on. And sometimes the bottom view can say that, hey, I need the data too. And usually for these kind of scenarios, depending on how you want to pass it, you can pass it through the constructor down to the view, or you can actually also use environment object. But environment object is only available in the view itself. So how can I use it inside a view model, which is observable object? Well, and these kind of questions, you can see that this question was asked like a long time ago, how to pass environment object into view model. So you can, if you want to, it just becomes a little bit more complicated, right? You can pass in the global state. This is just an example of how you can perform this dependency injection and pass it inside the view model, all right? So it becomes hard, in other words. The other type of application that I was building was core data and Swift data application. And even for a very simple, very basic application where you have a movie list screen and it opens up a sheet, a modal, where the user is allowed to add a new movie. And then when you add a new movie from the sheet, you should be able to refresh the movie list screen. It becomes kind of painful. How do we refresh it if we are using, if everything is kind of like wrapped with view models? So one thing would be to, when the modal dismisses, we can just populate all the movies again by fetching the movies again from the view model. We can also implement the NSFetch results controller, but you can see there's a lot of code. Even if you make it generic, it's and use it for other view models, it becomes like a lot of code, right? And the other was just, which is the worst one probably, which is basically passing the flags from the task list to the add task view and then changing the flags so that the list of tasks or list of movies can refresh. I have done this before and it's horrible. If I'm trying to change a Boolean value so that my view can refresh and show the updated list, that means something has gone wrong. All right. So I was facing all of these different problems with when I was not following SwiftUI how it was meant to be. And for Swift data and for core data, I thought about, hey, why can't I just use fetch request? And why can't I just use query? I mean, these are the things provided by Apple. And the general consensus in our community, iOS community, was at that time, I'm talking about, by the way, 2022 and probably 2023. I'm sure some people still think that fetch requests and queries are bad and they still don't use it. But in 2022, it was basically frowned upon. I mean, if you talk about query, if you talk about fetch requests, you're just a bad person, right? And these kind of like comments I got a lot on social media that you can't use fetch requests, you can't use queries, all right? By the way, if you do have any questions, I know that I'm just speaking, you can always type your question in YouTube chat, all right? So you don't have to wait for the whole session to be over. If you have questions, you can just type it out. But I'm just going to continue. All right, so I cannot use fetch requests, I cannot use queries. All of those things provided by the SwiftUI team, they're completely useless. Well, at least that's what the community, iOS community, is saying, that don't use it, Azam. This is garbage, don't use it. And then I become confused that, okay, what should I do? I mean, is it so hard to make these applications if I'm just avoiding every single thing? If I'm not using fetch request, I'm not using query, I cannot use environment object in the view, I cannot use app storage in the view, I cannot use, all of these things. I should not be touching in the view because they're only available in the view. I should be accessing them inside my observable object. All right. So I became confused. I'm like, okay, what can I do? So I looked at React because I think SwiftUI is kind of inspired from React and kind of inspired from Flutter also. And I looked at it and I'm like, okay, how does React work? Because I've already been working with React. And in React, they use a pattern called the container presentation pattern, where the question is, which architecture do you use in large iOS project, let's say food delivery app with Uber? So I'm going to discuss a large project in a moment, so you'll get an idea for that. Okay, so in React, they use a container presentation pattern. Basically, the idea is that the view, which is at the parent level, that view fetches the data and it just passes it down to the presentation, the smaller child views. All right. And here's the React code. Now, maybe you won't be able to read this if you don't have any idea of how React works, but this is kind of like the parent view or a screen. Like this is like the container view. And you can see that in the container view, they basically load the data, they put it in the state, there's the state, and then they pass the state down to the child view, which is dog images view. So that's what they were doing over there. All right. So I'm like, okay, let's try it out. I mean, let's experiment and try it out. How will that work if I do the same thing in SwiftUI? So I went back to my application for movies. All right. By the way, these should be screens, not views. All of these are screens, okay? Meaning kind of like a container view. Okay, so I went back to my movies application and I'm like, okay, I have these screens, the movie list screen, add movie screen, movie details screen. Go ahead, talk to the HTTP client directly. No view models, just talk to the HTTP client directly. All right. The code kind of looked like this. All right. So this is a different example. This is a news list screen. See that? News list screen. I'm accessing my HTTP client through the environment value. And then right over here, when the page actually loads, I make the call. I get all the articles, assign it to the local state, and it just displays and it works nicely. So everything was working over here. All right. Now, these are apps that they don't really have any domain logic, So sometimes you will be working on apps where it's basically you're just trying to fetch data from some sort of a JSON API, like Pokemon API, and then just displaying it. All right. So this worked out really good for a news application because I'm not creating news, I'm just displaying it, right? There's no logic in this right now. I mean, I can sort it, I can filter it maybe, but it's not really any programming logic that I need to implement over here. So that was my first step, that how about if I just access the HTTP client directly, okay, from my views itself. Okay. So this was my first thing. Now, obviously, this is just hook. You don't really have to worry about that. This is just for sorting stuff, I think. Okay. So the problem with using directly HTTP client and storing a local state, you can see that I created a local state inside the view, right, with a state variable. The problem that I encountered is that, well, sometime I am working on apps that requires me to not only get the data from from the server, but also add the data, right? Like in this case, I'm getting HTTP client. I am calling somewhere, let's see, over here, right there, add user screen, and add user screen is now supposed to add the user. So I will handle it back again in the user list screen. Okay. So this becomes a little bit of a problem, right? Not a major problem, but this became a little bit of a problem because if I wanted to share data with other screens, like list of users, how would I do that? because the list of users, the list of news, the list of customers, whatever, they are locally inside the view, right? So if I want to share it with multiple views, maybe one view is trying to update users, maybe one view is trying to add a new user, you know, and so on. Maybe there are views that are trying to display the users in a different way. How do I do it? I mean, I can just pass it around in a constructor, initializer, but that's a hassle, right? So how does React does it? Well, React simply use Redux, which is a global state. So maybe eventually I'll have to turn over to using the global state. And this was the problem, right? That when you have the customers, you need other views to have customers also because they want to update the customers or remove the customers and so on. So I wanted some sort of architecture that allows me to share the data with other views much easier than just passing it down. Well, then came the environment object. Well, environment object, in order to create an environment object, you must have an observable, right? So, okay. So what I did is I'm like, okay, I have movie list screen, add movie screen, movie detail screen. All of these are screens, by the way. I think I have to update that. So let's just say that these are screens. Instead of talking to the HTTP client directly, because in my situation it's not going to work because I also need the screens to update the data, and different screens can update the data, and all of that has to be in sync. So what if I put something in the middle over here and like a model, some people call it view model, or a store or something. Now you might be thinking, hold on a second, so we're back to the same problem again. I mean, isn't this the view model? But if you remember, the view model, and I'll explain it again, what I was doing before was I was following the very classical approach where every screen will have a separate view model. All right, so that's a very important thing to remember. I know from the diagram that you're looking at right now, you're like, well, isn't this like a view model, right? If you want to call it a view model, that's fine, but that's not following the classical definition of view model because view model correlation is one-to-one with the screen. And this is not a one-to-one correlation, all right? Apple actually talked about this particular diagram, I guess, or this particular architecture in their 2020 talk, Data Essentials in SwiftUI. And this is a diagram which is actually from Apple. What they're talking about is that these different views, which are in blue color, they are trying to communicate with something that gives them access to these data models. Data models, this can be like whatever, user, this can be like maybe account, data model. If you're building some sort of I don't know, e-commerce application, this can be products or something. But what is this sitting over there, right? So this is kind of like that layer which allows the views to talk to it so that you can get that data, all right? So I like to call this store, aggregate root model, whatever you want to call it. Some people like to call it view model because I have seen a lot of code from many different developers. They just call it view model, but they don't really have a one-to-one correlation, all right? So again, as a person who has actually worked with view models back in the early 2000s with WPF, it kind of seems really weird. And Apple also sometimes do these kind of mistakes in their code also, all right? Just from the definition point of view. The usage point of view, they're using it mostly right, but from a definition point of view, if you look at the definition, it's a one-to-one correlation between the screen and the view model. If you look at the Apple sample apps, Fruta, Food Truck, they have a lot of different apps together online. You will see some hint of this particular model or particular architecture being used. Now, again, I'm not saying that you should follow 100% Apple implementation, because over here they're also obviously making some mistakes in this code that you're looking at the screen right now. I mean, I would probably not create my HTTP client again and again inside every single function. I would probably pass in as a protocol so that you can overwrite it and mock it. All right, but you have to extract out the things that make sense. And what makes sense to me is that food truck model, maybe we can call it food truck store, right? It's maintaining the entire state of the application. See that? It has access to a truck, it has access to orders, it also has access to server donuts. So this one particular observable object has access to several different entities, several different models, which actually takes us back to this diagram that Apple initially presented. See that? So this is the food truck model, right? Food truck model. This is basically acting as a food truck model, this layer that they have created right there. All right. Now, I'm sure that some of you might be thinking, hold on a second, my application is too large. I can't just have one observable object and shove everything inside of that. Nobody's saying that. Just take it easy. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Nobody is saying that, all right? But if your application is small size or even medium size, try just starting out with one source of truth, one observable object, and see how it goes. You may end up with a more deeper class rather than a shallow class. All right, and deeper modules are perfectly fine. I mean, just because they have a lot of code doesn't really make them wrong. All right. Sometimes when you're working on a very large application like a food delivery app or a e-commerce app, then you really have to draw it out that, okay, we have a product store, we have a fulfillment store, we have a catalog store. So in those cases, you can actually have multiple store. But if you are just writing your application, small size, even medium size apps, you may be able to, get everything working with just one observable object. Now, this is a really, some parts of it, you can definitely check out the food truck model. Remember that Apple didn't really made order, let's say over here, add order truck view model, list truck view model, order view model, add order view model. They didn't do that. That's the classical MVVM approach where you're doing one screen, one view model, one screen, one view model. This is from one of my projects. I created a product store because my project was a little bit bigger. So instead of putting everything inside whatever my project is, where can I find the food truck? Well, you can just search it, food truck. Just search food truck SwiftUI app. You'll find it. All right. So product store over here, you can see. So this is my code. It's taking HTTP client. So this can also be a protocol, obviously, if you're mocking it. Protocol. And it's managing products. That's what it does. All right. But remember that it is a source of truth for products. And it has all of these different functions like a load product. Anything to do with a product, this particular product store will handle it. All right. Is that the view model? Well, are we creating different product store for every different screen? The answer is no. Then I wouldn't really call it a view model. Now, iOS community, I think they're very confused about the actual definition of view model. They just call everything a view model. They just call everything a view model. And that's actually what happens when you have actually never worked with framework that actually uses MVVM. Because most of the iOS developers, they are unaware of WPF. They've never worked with WPF, right? Which is a classical framework where you actually use MVVM. With XAML files and C# and all that. So when they were first introduced to view models and MVVM in probably in 2019, they just start calling everything a view model. All right. This is what the app file looks like. You can see that I use environment object, and when I create a product store, I just inject it into the environment. Now everyone can access it. Now everyone can access it doesn't mean that everyone should access it. All right. The places where I will try my best to access product store would be mostly in the container views, mainly at the top level containers, which are called the parent views, right? The screens, basically. I would try my best not to access environment object in my reusable views. That's a very important thing to understand over here, because if you try to access your environment object inside a reusable view, then you have created a dependency on that reusable view on the environment object. All right. So it loses its flexibility to be reusable. All right. Sometimes what happens is that a reusable view, uh, it just needs to get that value from the environment, because it will behave same way uh, no matter how you use it, and it will need that value. So only in those circumstances you can actually access, but I would try my best to avoid those scenarios. The other complaint that I get from using environment, a lot of developers, which I don't really understand this train of thought actually at all, is that they complain that, well, when you put something in the environment, your whole app can use it, and even the views that don't need it can use it. Well, yes, environment is a global state. So I'm not really sure if they understand the meaning of global, right? I mean, that's just the English definition. What does global mean? Global means it's accessible to everyone. Everyone can use it if they want to. If they don't want to, then don't use it. All right? The other complaint I hear about environment in general is that people don't like to use environment because if you forget to inject the environment object, then your app crashes. Well, I think it's great that your app crashes. I think it's awesome because you can then go and fix it, right? I mean, I hope that you're not really just writing code and without testing, you're just uploading it to the App Store. I hope not. I hope that your QA team and your team is testing it out, or at least when you make some changes, you actually run your code. So I don't really understand that kind of mentality where developers are saying that, well, I don't really like environment because if I don't inject it, it just crashes. Well, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. You know. And then when you inject it in the product list screen, you can access it. All right. You can see over here, I'm accessing it in the product list screen. I'm not accessing it in the product cell view. That's a child view. That's my reusable view. I might use that somewhere else. So I'm not going to use environment object from there. And it's always a good idea to create smaller views and then only pass the data that that view needs. You see that product cell view? What does product cell view actually needs? A product. What is being passed to the product cell view? A product, right? So this is the important thing, that you only pass in the stuff that the view actually needs. And that is going to make SwiftUI much more better in performance, and it's going to make it much better in dependency management. And the same thing over here, right? You can see add product screen, add product screen, which is a container. If it needs to add a product, which it does because that's what the page is all about, then you just access the product store and just add it over there. And the beauty of getting these things from the environment object and using environment object is that when the add product screen is going to add a product, the product list screen will automatically find out that, oh, some product is added, I better refresh myself. I better sync with the product store.products. So that's the beauty of it. When I wrote about this in 2022, a lot of people then asked, well, isn't the product store just a view model? And this usually comes from people who have never worked with view models, who have never worked with applications that actually uses view models, because as I've been saying, view model is a one-to-one relationship with the view, with the screen at least. See that? Movie list screen, movie list view model, add movie screen, add movie view model. Just think about it in this way. If you're working on a very large application and if you're following the classical MVVM approach, let's food delivery application. How many screens will you have? 50? Probably. Screens. Views, you can have 200 views. Screens, 50, right? Let's just say 50. So how many view models will you have? 50. I think you got the answer. You just answered your own question in this case. You are not going to create 50 view models, right? So the store is a little bit different, right? I mean, I'm calling it store, and this is what people do. They call it movie view model. So people do it like this. And this, at least from a definition point of view, it's not correct, all right? And a lot of even big developers I see in the iOS community making this mistake. That's not the point of a view model. The view model definition is it's one-to-one with the view. So it's always a good idea not to call it view model because it just triggers some sort of a confusion, at least among developers who have actually worked with view models. So I call it store. Now, if you want to call it view model, that's perfectly fine, but it's going to add some confusion because I'll always be thinking, okay, view model, is it like for a particular screen stuff? Okay, that's fine. Whatever you call it, all right? So now what we are seeing is movie list screen, add movie screen, movie details screen, all of these screens which are performing some sort of action with movies, they're just communicating or interacting with one observable object, movie store. That's it. Again, the name over here is not important, everyone, okay? Some people call it movie store, some people call it movie controller, some people, they call it movie service. That's also common. And I've also seen, as I mentioned, people calling it movie view model, all right? But the whole idea is that it's basically a source of truth for movies. If you need the movies, if you want to do any stuff with the movies, movie store is your answer. Same with the product. If you want to do anything with the product, you will use the product store. So what happens is that this view model reduced to one observable object which can provide the data to all the views that needs the movies. But what is in the view then? I mean, if you look at this food truck from Apple, what actually they're doing in the view, the actual view. Look at the code over here, what Apple is doing. These are the same things that you were probably doing inside your view model. All right? So I think then if you are still not understanding, I'll send you a link to the article. You can probably read that. It's not really the problem with the view model. It's if you're following the architecture of creating view model for every single screen. That's the problem, all right? Now, what is the orders view? This is a food truck application, right? It has these properties. These are mostly transformation properties, or we can call it transformation, we can call it filtering logic, you can call it validation logic, and so on. And they are right inside your view, all right? So in other words, what Apple is doing is that Apple is saying that your view itself is basically a view model, all right? So all the code that you were writing in the view model, for presentation logic, then you can write it in the view. The domain logic belongs in the service or the model or the store. So if we look at this diagram of how we started with all of these different view models, and now we have reduced it down to a store, which it's still an observable object, but that is where you can put your business logic. So your business logic should be in the store, the service, whatever you want to call it. All right. But now the question becomes like, well, okay, that's fine. It works for it works for the store, but what about for bigger applications? All right. So one of the question is, if it's a store, then how is it a view? Is it a view MVVM? Well, it's not. It's not MVVM, right? It's not MVVM. It's called the built-in architecture, or some people call it MV, but there are so many definitions of MV. So everyone is doing their own definition now. Some people are completely avoiding observable objects. I'm definitely not one of them. I think observable objects should still be used, but you should just not create observable object because you have added a new screen. Because you can have 200 screens, that doesn't mean you need 200 view models. The observable object should be added based on the data that it is providing. All right, and sometimes for small apps or even medium-sized apps, all of those can be included in a single observable object. You can call it store, you can call it service, whatever. But how will this work in bigger apps? Well, in bigger apps, as I mentioned earlier on, you can add more root or the store objects, or more observable objects, but not because you have added separate screens, but because now you want to manage some completely different entity, a different model. So in this case, we have movie store, we have a product store. See, we are adding different stores over there. And this is what the diagram can look like when we're talking about a large application. All right. So over here, you can see the large application over here. Now, these things, catalog UI or shipping and all that stuff, I mean, they can be different packages if you're reusing them, but they can be different folders also. So this can be a catalog store, inventory store, ordering store, shipping store. The UI is just the UI, just screens and views associated with these things. All right. All of these stores, catalog store, inventory store, ordering store, shipping store, they will have access to the HTTP client. And that's it. That's how they will work. Now think about it. Now I'm going to wait on this screen and just think about it. If you are building a food delivery application, right? And if you're building a catalog screen, how many screens will you have? Let's say that you have 20 screens for catalog. I'm just going to be kind and I'm just going to say you have 20 screens over here. You have 20 screens for inventory. You have 20 screens for ordering. You have 20 screens for shipping. 80 screens? 80 screens, right? Screens, not views. Views, reusable, 200. You can have 500 views. Views can be like, like small things, like a rating view, right? You can have like a progress view, your own custom progress view. You're ordering, that the notification that you get when you order something, that it has been shipped or not, well, that can be another view. So forget about the views. Views can be like 200 views. 80 screens. 80 screens means if you're following classical approach, you need 80 view models, right? Now that will become very, very complicated. Now I'm sure that some people will be like, well, no, I don't really need 80 view models. I'll just need 4 view models: catalog view model, inventory view model, ordering view model, and shipping view model. And if you are following that approach of just 4 view models, that is great, because that's what I have written over here also. See that? I have 4 view models or 4 stores. I don't really like to call them view model because, again, I go back to WPF applications, right? Because I have the background in .NET, and I've been using view models in .NET with WPF, and it's always like a one-to-one correlation. All right. And in WPF, actually, we were not really putting any business logic per se in our view model. It was mostly related to the logic for the UI, because that's the job of a view model, is to just give the data to the UI and perform those kind of logical operation, like validation, transformation, mapping, all those kind of implementation in the view model. All right. But now with this architecture, if you have catalog stuff, you just put it in a catalog store, inventory store, ordering store, shipping store. The name is not important, all right? You can call it catalog service, inventory service, ordering service, shipping service. I have seen people code from many different companies. They just call it catalog view model, inventory view model, ordering view model, shipping view model. If you want to do that, perfectly fine, go with it. Just don't create 20 different view models because you have 20 different screens in catalog, 20 different view model because you have 20 different screens for ordering. Don't do that. You're going to get into a massive, complexity that you don't want. All right. See that? This is how we started. Every single screen had a different view model, and this is how we kind of like end up with. We are having catalog store, catalog service, whatever. All right. So fast forward to 2025 and even 24 probably. Now I am starting to see a lot of people realizing this, right? When I started these articles, when I wrote these articles in 2022, it was not really well received. I'll actually put the link there. It was not really well received from the community because it was kind of like a new concept, right? And it was new. It was not a concept that I invented or anything. It was just the SwiftUI itself. It was just built into SwiftUI. And now if you go forward, you can see a lot of people are actually talking about the same thing, right? And these are the people who are working on large applications. These are not the people who are working on Hello World. These are the people who are working on very large applications, all right? And this just goes on. I mean, there are a lot of articles being written which are saying that I don't want to create a view model because I added a different screen. I don't want to do that. A lot of people are actually talking about it. Even Stanford has updated their code. They're calling it palette store, but in the actual audio, they still call it a view model. All right. So see what I was talking about, that sometimes they just create one particular observable object, but they still call it a view model. And that's okay. I mean, if this is what they want to call it, that's fine. I've seen a lot of people doing that also. All right. So we have a question: how does the model macro affect this? Should it be ignored, so to speak? The model macro, okay, so that is for Swift data. And in Swift data, I don't really want to go that far, by the way, but I'll actually maybe talk about Swift data. No, Swift data model macro is perfectly fine. That's a great question. All right. So here's the question: why Apple use view model in one of their demo? I know what your demo you're talking about. I think you're talking about sticker, right? Something sticker view model, right? Is that the question, right? Because I got to answer for that too. Okay, sticker view model. So they're calling it sticker view model because I've said the same thing. I think you were not really paying attention. What did I say over here? Right? You can call it catalog view model, you can call it catalog store, you can call it catalog service, right? Right? They're just calling it sticker view model. They can call it sticker store also. But that's the thing. I think when people talk about a data source, then they just try to call it a view model. Whenever people talk about observable object, they immediately say view model. Now, the question is not that they're calling it a sticker view model. The question is, did they create a separate view model for every single screen. Let me show you over here. Sticker list screen, add sticker screen, sticker detail screen. All right. Did they do that? Sticker list view model. So this is a question for the person who asked me the question. Add sticker. Did they do that? And you can guess the next one. Sticker detail view model. So I cannot really pronounce the name of the person who said why Apple used view model in one of their demo, but the question is, did they actually do it this way? Did they? Right? They didn't. They didn't do it this way because they use the view model as the same thing I was telling you, as a data source. So it's a very important thing for all of you to look a little bit deeper, deeper into the problem. There we go. The answer is no. You just said your answer. You just answered yourself. I didn't do anything. You just answered yourself. So that's the same thing that I was talking about over here. What was I talking about? That people are calling it with different names, right? Right? But if you follow the classical approach, so this is more of a classical approach when people talk about, if you go to the WPF community, right? And the reason for this is, and the reason why they do that classical approach, why they create a separate view model for every single screen, why do they do that? You know that? They do that because every single screen is different and they check the logical aspects, the validation of the screen in that particular view model. So if you have a login screen, they create a login view model, and then in the login view model, they will check that, oh, the user has entered the username and the password. They should be this many, alphabets long or characters long. Oh, the message has to be incorrect password. All of that validation logic for the UI that goes in the login view model. And that's why they end up with so many view models. But in SwiftUI, if you're talking, in SwiftUI, if you have a login screen, which is basically a view, that can contain a validate function in the view itself that can validate the UI. That can validate the VM. We don't need a login view model to validate the login screen. We can just validate it right inside the view itself. That is known as the presentation logic. There's a very big difference on presentation logic and the domain or business rules. Don't put business rules inside your view. Business rules has to be tested. They should go in the observable objects. You can call it store, you can call it whatever, service, whatever. All right. That single view model approach, how testable, is just asking. I don't know what that question means. I think if you are trying to test something in the view, then you can extract it out into a state, or you can just write a UI test and test it passively. Most of the time, the code that I have is not really worth testing in the view. So you are saying group all the logic of sticker in a single view model. Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Yes. And that is what Apple has actually done also. So I'm not saying that Apple is actually doing that. If you go back to this one, food truck model, they're doing the same thing. See that? Now, food truck model is a small app. Well, it's a medium-sized app, but it's managing everything. All the state for the app is managed by the food truck model. All right. Now, I'm sure that some of you might say, well, we shouldn't be looking at the Apple code samples and getting inspiration for architecture. Well, I would say you shouldn't be looking, you should be looking at everywhere if you want inspiration. If you find a piece of paper in the trash which has some architectural details, you should pick it up, wipe it out, and then read it, and then try to implement that. So it doesn't really matter where it's coming from. What matters is that does it work for you or not? All right, that's the important part. Okay, where am I? No, I forgot. Okay, so fast forward, looking at these examples and everything, you have already seen sticker view model. I think that's what Apple is calling it. They're calling it a view model because they didn't really know what to call it, but they're using it like a service. They're using it like a store. They're using it correctly like an observable object. All right, that's perfectly fine. I think whenever people add a observable object, they automatically just call it view model. Another thing to keep in mind is that your presentation logic, the logic that has to do with the view's logic, not the domain logic. There's a very big difference between presentation logic and the domain logic. I'm talking about presentation logic. You can add your presentation logic in the view itself. Then the question comes, well, how do we test it? Most of the time you will see that the logic that for the view is not worth testing. Most of the time. Sometimes it is worth testing, and then you can extract it out into a state, which I like to call view state. And then it's a struct, not an observable object. Don't call it view state, call it whatever, something else. And then you can test it out. All right. What are the disadvantages of using multiple view models? I think the whole lecture was spent talking about the disadvantages of, you should watch the recording again, all right? I mean, I think if you're asking what are the disadvantages of using multiple view model, then you should probably watch this recording again. Doesn't look like you were paying attention, all right? Because that's what we talked about. How would you, refresh the data? How would you pass the data from one view model to the other view model? I mean, there are like so many different, if you have 50 view models, it will become a chaos. Another question is, how will this affect app validation from Apple theme? What if they disapprove the app because of this? No, they will never disapprove your app because of, I don't even know because of what. This is perfectly valid code. All of this code is from Apple. So this is not like something that I'm inventing on the fly. They will never do that, all right? Yes, so if you just join in, so I would say watch the recording, definitely. Let me see if I have an article for you also. If you go to my website, I have written a very detailed article on this. There we go. And keep in mind that as I mentioned before, it's usually not what they call it, it's how they use it. And that's a very important distinction, because I've met with a lot of developers in different conferences. They show me their code and they're like, oh, Azam, I'm using view models and you told me not to use view model. Is this okay? And when I look at the code, I'm like, well, you're just calling it a view model, but you're using it like a service. And that's perfectly fine. Some people just call it a view model. Some people call it service. Some people call it store. Some people even call it controllers. I've seen people calling it controller. So all of that is fine if you use it correctly. I personally just won't call it a view model because my brain then triggers the WPF thing. See, it's like view model. So we will have different view model for every screen. And in those cases, I tend to not call these things with the view model name, all right? But I've seen people calling it many different, some people even call it like a repository. So there are many different names people use, but they're using, the usage is the most important one, which I was talking about the sticker example, right? I know that somebody was going to ask that question, but it's not what they call it, it's how they use it. And that's where you have to do critical thinking, which is lacking in the programming community with all of these AI tools that they're doing. Why isn't there an industry standard? Well, there isn't an industry standard because different apps, if I'm building a Swift data or core data application, I would use it completely different. In those cases, in my Swift data or core data, my models will host the business logic. All right, my models, the actual model, like if I create a model, whatever, book, whatever you want to call it, class book, the Swift data model. So I will add the business logic right here. It's easily testable. I don't really need to create store or service or a view model if I'm using Swift data or core data, just Swift data or core data. So I can just use it. So see how the architecture kind of changes when you're using different technologies or your application is different. Marius is saying naming is irrelevant and more about separation of concern and testability. Yeah, naming definitely is irrelevant. It's obviously sometimes, makes sense to call it a little bit different things, like service can be a good name, store can be okay. So all of those things kind of clear those things out. This is actually similar to something store for Vue.js. Okay, I have not used Vue.js, so I'm not sure about that, but okay. All right. So you can see that if I'm using core data or Swift data, I would just put all my business logic inside the model itself. My presentation logic, meaning the logic which just deals with the presentation, the view, I can just put it inside the view itself. And one thing to keep in mind always is that when you're developing something, when you're developing your apps, some things will have a high priority and some things will have a low priority. All right. High priority mostly will always be your domain logic, like the actual domain, your actual business rules. Those will be all the time, they will be very high priority. And low priority things or not as high priority can be the presentation logic. If you have like a simple logic going on where you're checking if the fields are not empty or not empty or not empty, you don't really need to test those things out if you don't want to. If you want to write a UI test or end-to-end test and test those things out passively, that is perfectly fine too. I think the most important test that you're going to be writing will be the domain unit test, and even more important than that will be end-to-end test, which tests the whole thing, the whole from the client perspective, from the user, the whole thing. Obviously, end-to-end means the whole thing, all right? No mocking, no nothing, just the real thing. That will be the most important test that you're going to write. But I have seen again and again that people, developers, they don't want to write the end-to-end test. And their complaint is, well, it's just too slow. Well, of course it's too slow. It's doing a lot of things, right? It's actually an end-to-end test. So always make sure that if your app is complicated, like if you're building an e-commerce application which has a very complicated flow, try to write an end-to-end test because that is the best against regression, meaning bugs. All right. All right, everyone. So, well, we discussed a lot of things. Hopefully, you have enjoyed it. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about it, Yeah, I think I already shared this link. You can definitely check out my website at azamsharp.com, and you can read more about it. If you are looking for an actual course, this is the course, the link to the course. That will be helpful if I have a link to the course, right? Let me see. Where is the course? Is that the Cognito window? Okay. So the link to the course is right there. This is the course. And well, the link to the course is right there also. But the coupon code is SwiftUI. If you use the coupon code, it will give you 40% off Uh, Let me actually write it down. 40% off coupon, and the link will expire tomorrow. So again, if you just want to see other aspects of it, like in the course, I covered the navigation, uh, global, global sheets, global models, testing, and you can check it out. I have the link in the course, I think, right there, so you can definitely check it out. All right. Apart from that, thank you so much everyone for coming. If you want to follow me, I'm Adam Sharp on Twitter. All right. And that is pretty much it. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. All right. Thank you so much for presenting. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, experience for the community. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. Grant, thank you, Grant. Yeah, it was fun. I think in a couple of weeks, not next week. Next week I'm not here, but yeah, week after that, we can probably do some sort of like programming. I'll show you how you can set everything up, and that you can kind of like get started with that. All right. So thank you everyone for coming again. Thanks everyone. Yeah, just my only suggestion is just try it out. In the end, just try it out and see how it feels like. Maybe you'll enjoy it. Maybe you won't enjoy it. Try it out. This can work for small apps, medium app, large size apps. It can work for all of these apps. All right, so make sure to try it out. I mean, I tried out many different patterns: MVVM, MVC, Redux, a lot of different patterns. All right. Are your courses beginner or intermediate friendly? Um, well, it depends on the course, I guess. It really depends on the course, that what you're trying to learn. So there is a beginner friendly course, which is this one probably. Copy link. This is also a free course, but this is like Introduction to SwiftUI. It's a beginner friendly course. But other courses, they are intermediate. I guess they're mostly intermediate. Yeah. And apart from courses, I also do workshops. So if you wanted to ever go and attend a workshop, here are the workshop link. I will probably add another workshops over there, but right now there's only one that is coming up in August. It's on server side Swift. These are 3-hour workshops live from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. And these are obviously very hands-on, like you're working in the code, learning about, in this case, server-side Swift, which is very important. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll do this. We'll do this. In a couple of weeks again. All right, everyone. Thank you again for coming, and I'll see you in the future.